I was stuck in traffic this morning, staring at the bumper in front of me, and my mind drifted back to that universal childhood fantasy. You know the one. You are 6 years old, you have got a beach towel tied around your neck, you are standing on the sofa, and for a split second, you are not just a kid, you are flying. You are shooting lasers from your eyes, you are lifting a bus off a trapped kitten.
Oh, absolutely. It is the classic omnipotence fantasy. I mean, Freud would have a field day with it, but psychologically, it is really just a normal developmental milestone.
Yeah.
We all want to be special. We all want to be distinct from the herd.
Exactly. But then, the towel comes off, you grow up. Real life hits you with gravity and taxes. You realize the most super thing you can do is manage to carry all the grocery bags in one trip without cutting off the circulation to your fingers.
Right. Normal just becomes the baseline.
Normal becomes the baseline, but looking at the massive stack of research we have today for this deep dive, what happens if we completely flip the script? What if being special became the base? What if breathing fire or manipulating gravity was, a standard Tuesday?
That is the exact fundamental sociological experiment that launches the world we are covering today. We are not looking at a world where one person has power, like a Superman scenario. We're looking at a society where the anomaly is not the person with powers, but the person without them.
And today, we are taking a massive deep dive Saga of My Hero Academia. And when I say massive, I mean it. We are tracing the entire timeline of this series, from Chapter 1 all the way to the final war for the fate of society. We have got source materials covering the economics of superheroes, the psychology of a great man's society, and what happens when that society totally collapses.
It is such a fascinating case study because on the surface, if you just glance at the promotional art or the cover, it looks like a classic upbeat superhero romp. Bright colors, big punches. But when you really dig into these sources, it is actually a heavy deconstruction.
Yeah, it asks some really hard questions.
It does. It asks questions about legacy, about strict utilitarianism, and about what happens when a culture relies way too heavily on a single pillar to hold up the sky.
So let us establish the ground rules for you. We are in a version of Japan, and really a version of the whole world, where 80% of the population possesses a quirk.
Right. And we need to define that immediately because a quirk is not magic.
Right.
In this universe, it is biological. It is pure genetics. It is as natural as having blue eyes or curly hair, except your curly hair might be made of actual vine.
And because 80% of people have these abilities, the entire infrastructure of society, and this is one of the things I found most, heroism is not vigilant. If Batman showed up in My Hero Academia, he would be arrested in about 5.
Oh, immediate. He would be charged with vigilantism and unlicensed quirk usage before he even threw a batarang. In this world, hero is a literal job title. It is a government-sanctioned profession.
Well, you have to go to school for it.
Exactly. You go to a specialized high school, you pass a provisional license exam, you get picked up by an agency, you even have corporate sponsors on your uniform. It is effectively a mix of being a SWAT officer, a pro athlete, and an online influencer.
Which introduces a really weird economic incentive, does it not? If your pay is determined by popularity polls and the sheer number of incidents you resolve, do you actually want crime to go away?
That is the cynicism lurking in the background of the early chapters. It turns altruism into a commodity. But that brings us to our lens into this world, Izuku Midoriya, who is often called Deku.
And Deku has a massive problem. He is a statistical anomaly.
He is part of that shrinking 20% of the population born completely quirkless.
Yeah.
He has no powers. In a world where your value is often determined by what your quirk can do, he is viewed by his peers as defective.
The sources mention his own mother apologizing to him when he is a toddler. Like, they go to the doctor, find out he has no quirk, and she is just crying and saying, "I am sorry," instead of telling him he can do it. That has got to totally mess up a psyche.
It creates a deep-seated complex. He is treated as disabled, effectively. And yet, Midoriya is obsessed. He endlessly analyzes hero data. He writes detailed notes on fighting styles in these little burnt notebooks. He wants to be a hero like his idol, All Might, who's known as the symbol of peace, but reality keeps telling him to just give up.
So we have this marginalized kid in a superhuman world. And this sets up the inciting incident. I want to spend a moment here because I think the scene is often read just as an action beat, but it really feels like a sharp critique of the system we just described. This is the sludge villain incident.
Absolutely. So you have a villain made of fluid, thinkable, living mud who has captured a middle school student, specifically Katsuki Bakugo, who happens to be Midoriya's childhood bully. Bakugo has a really powerful explosion quirk, but he is trapped and suffocating. Now look at the scene. The street is lined with pro heroes, licensed, paid professionals.
Oh.
And they are doing absolutely nothing.
They are literally just standing there watching.
They are spectating. One hero says, "My quirk is not a good match for Slud." Another says, "I'm waiting for someone with a better type advantage to show up." They are paralyzed by protocol and hyper-specialization. They view it as a job where they brought the wrong tool, so they just do not work.
It is the bystander effect, but professionalized. It is that mindset of, well, someone else is on the schedule for this, so I will just wait.
Exactly. But then you have Midoriya, the kid with no tools,
Yep.
no license, no power whatsoever. He sees fear in Bakugo's eyes, and his body just moves on its own. He runs in. He throws his school backpack at the villain's eye. It's logically completely futile, but it buys a split second.
And that split second changes history, because All Might, the #1 hero, is watching in the crowd. And this leads to the big reveal that really kicks off the lore of Dive. All Might is not the invincible god everyone...
No, and this is a massive state secret. All Might was egregiously injured in a fight 5 years prior. He is missing half his respiratory system and his stomach. He can only maintain that buff, smiling hero form for a few hours a day. The rest of the time, he looks like a skeleton. He is coughing up blood.
It is entirely a facade. The symbol of peace is basically a performance piece at this point.
It really is. He is holding the entire country's morale together with duct tape and sheer willpower. But he sees something in Midoriya's reckless dash. He sees the absolute essence of heroism meddling where you do not belong to save a life. So he tracks Midoriya down and tells him, you can become a hero, and he offers him a way to do it.
This introduces the central mechanism of the story, the quirk known as One for All. And we need to be really clear on this because it gets incredibly complicated later on.
Right. Most quirks are genetic. You were born with them, they settle in by age 4, and that is what you get. One for All is totally unique. It is a stockpiling power. It cultivates energy and physical strength in one person, and then it can be transferred voluntarily to another person, kind of like passing a torch. All Might is the 8th holder of this power. He chooses Midoriya to be the 9th.
But he does not just zap him with magic or hand him a glowing orb. I love this part of the early logs, the American Dream Plan. He makes Midoriya clean up
A beach full of illegal dumping. Refrigerators, pickup trucks, tires, you name it. It is crucial because One for All has been stockpiling raw power for 8 generations. It is arguably the strongest kinetic force on the planet. If you put that much voltage into a weak wire, the wire melts. If Midoriya took the power without serious physical prep, his limbs would literally explode off his body.
So it grounds the fantasy. You do not just get the power handed to you. You have to suffer to even be able to accept the power.
Precise. It is a strict meritocracy of 10 months of hauling trash just to build a vessel capable of holding the quirk.
So after 10 months, he eats a strand of All Might's hair, which, by the way, grossest transfer method ever gains the power, and heads to the entrance exam for UA High School. This is basically the Harvard of heroes, and he totally bombs.
He fails the combat portion completely. The test is simple: destroy robots for points. Midoriya has the power now, but he is terrified to use it because he knows he cannot control the output yet. He has 0 points as the clock winds down. But then the exam administrators release a 0-pointer, a gimmick giant robot the size of a skyscraper meant to be an obstacle to just avoid, and it traps a girl, Otaka Uraraka, under some rubble.
And we see an exact repeat of the sludge villain moment. Protocol says run away because there are no points to be gained here. Instinct says save her.
He jumps. He unleashes One for All for the very first time. He smashes the giant robot into pieces and instantly shatters his own arm and both legs from the sheer recoil. He saves her, but he completely destroys himself in the process.
And he gets into the school, not on combat points, but on rescue points.
Which is a hidden metric UA uses to judge true heroic character. It validates his specific type of heroism. Total self-sacrifice. But now he's in the school, and he enters as a massive glass cannon. Every single time he uses his power, he breaks his bone, and he is thrown right into Class 1A, which is a total pressure cooker of elite talent.
Let us look at the rivals here, because the social dynamics of this class really mirror the broader society. We have Bakugo, the bully we mentioned.
Bakugo is fascinating because he is the gifted kid archetype gone totally wrong. He has always been told he is amazing, his quirk is amazing, he's destined to be the best. So he developed a massive superiority complex. He views Midoriya's sudden power not as a miracle, but as a direct betrayal. He thinks Midoriya lied to him for years about being quirkless just to mock him behind his back. His entire worldview is that victory equals heroism. If you win, you are right.
Then you have Shoto Todoroki, and this is where we really start to see the dark underbelly of this quirk-obsessed society.
If Bakugo is natural talent, Todoroki is manufactured talent. He is the son of Endeavor, who is the #2 hero in the world. Now, Endeavor is fiercely obsessed with surpassing All Might, but he realized years ago he could not bridge that gap with his own power. So he turned to eugenics.
That is a really heavy word, but looking at the source material, that is exactly what it is.
It is exactly what it is. He engaged in what the society calls a quirk merit. He essentially bought a wife solely for her ice powers to balance out his own fire, attempting to breed a biological successor who would not overheat in battle. Todoroki is the product of that loveless, highly abusive union.
So Todoroki hates his father.
He intensely loathes him. He actually has a massive burn scar on the left side of his face from his mother, who mentally snapped under the abuse and poured boiling water on him because his left side resembled his father. So Todoroki makes a vow he will become the top hero, using only his mother's ice power. He refuses to use his fire side because he sees it as Endeavor's power. He wants to reach the top with one hand tied behind his back, just to spite his dad.
This all culminates in the sports festival arc. In this universe, the Olympics have basically been replaced by the UA Sports Festival. The whole world tunes in to watch high schoolers fight in a tournament, and we get Midoriya facing off against Todoroki.
This fight really changes the trajectory of the whole series. Midoriya wants to win, obviously, but during the fight, he sees Todoroki shivering. Using only ice is physically hurting Todoroki. He is getting severe frostbite. Midoriya, who is currently breaking his own fingers one by one just to stay in the match, starts screaming at him. He completely ignores the win condition to act as a battlefield therapy.
He yells that iconic line, "It is your power, not his."
That is the line. He sacrifices his own chance at victory to help his opponent realize that his identity is his own. It is the core thesis of Midoriya's heroism, meddling where you do not belong to save someone's heart. Todoroki finally ignites his flames. He accepts himself. Midoriya loses the match, but he saves Todoroki's soul.
It is a really beautiful moment of character growth. But while the kids are playing sports and figuring themselves out, the real world outside the school is getting much sharper. We have to introduce the first major ideological villain of the story, Stain, the hero.
Stain is the first villain who is not just a common criminal. He is a critic. He argues that the entire hero system is deeply corrupt. He looks at heroes doing commercial endorsements and constantly worrying about their billboard rankings, and he says, "You are all fake." He believes the only true hero in the world is All Might, because All Might saves people purely out of altruism. Stain murders any hero he deems a fake to forcibly cleanse the society.
It is violent extremism, obviously, but the scary part that the sources highlight is that the public kind of listens.
That is the real danger. His video manifesto goes viral online. Everyday people watch it and think, well, he's a mass murderer, sure. But is he wrong about the commercialization of heroism? Are they just in it for the money? This sentiment radicalizes the underworld. Villains start gathering not just for a quick payday, but for a cohesive cause. This leads to the formal organization of the League of Villains as a serious paramilitary threat.
Which brings us to the Camino Ward incident. The stakes jump from school sports to a full-blown national crisis. The League of Villains actually kidnaps Bakugo, the pro-heroes launch a massive rescue operation, and we get the clash of the absolute titans, All Might versus All for One. We really need to define All for One here for you listening, because he is the puppet master.
If One for All is the torch passed down from person to person to save people, All for One, let us call him AFO, is the black hole. He is an ancient villain, well over a century old, who has the power to steal quirks from people and give them to others. He rules the underworld through fear and a network of favors. And, crucially, he is the one who inadvertently created One for All by giving a stockpiling quirk to his powerless, sickly brother generations ago.
So this entire series, this whole deep dive, is basically a massive family feud that got violently out of.
It is a generational blood feud spanning over a century. AFO is the shadow to All Might's light. And at Camino, AFO plays his absolute cruelest psychological card. It is not a physical punch, it is a revelation. He reveals that Shigaraki, the leader of the League of Villains, this decaying, scratching, unstable man-child, is actually the biological grandson of Nana Shimura.
Nana Shimura was All Might's master, the woman who gave him the One for All power.
Exactly. Imagine the sheer psychological torture of that moment. AFO purposefully tracked down the grandson of All Might's beloved mentor, found him alone and suffering on the streets, and deliberately groomed him into a monster, just to spite All Might. He wanted to force the symbol of peace to beat up the physical legacy of the woman he respected most in the world.
That is sickeningly brilliant villainy. But All Might, even with his secret exposed because his muscle form drops and the whole world sees his skinny skeletal form on live TV, he pulls out one last desperate United States.
He burns through the very last glowing embers of One for All inside him. He defeats AFO, putting him in Tartarus, which is their highest security prison. But the cost is total. The symbol of peace is extinguished. All Might can never be a hero again. He is permanently retired.
And that moment right after the fight, the broadcast where All Might points a skeletal finger directly at the camera, the world thinks he is warning the remaining villain. He says, "Next, it is your..." But Midoriya knows exactly what it means.
Midoriya hears the baton pass. He hears, "I have used up everything. Now, you have to carry this burden." But here is the sociological kicker that the sources emphasize. When the symbol of peace retires, the invisible crime deterrent effect vanishes overnight. Shadows lengthen. Villains get bolder. The society relied so heavily on one single man, the great man theory, and pure action, that without him, the entire structural integrity of the country begins to wobble.
Let us look at the other side of that coin. The villains, specifically Shigaraki, because he is not static, he is leveling up in the background just like Deku.
Shigaraki is essentially the dark mirror of Midoriya. Just as Midoriya is learning to become the greatest hero, Shigaraki is actively on a twisted hero's journey to become the greatest villain. We finally learn his full backstory. His real name is Tenko Shimura. He was a young child who manifested a decay quirk that he could not control. He accidentally killed his entire family, including his dog. It was a horrific, traumatic accident.
And nobody helped him. He was wandering around covered in blood.
He wandered the streets, dusty and traumatized. And normal pedestrians just walk right past him. Why? Because they thought, a hero will handle it. It is not my job. The extreme professionalization of heroism created a society of apathetic bystand. AFO was the only person who actually extended a hand to that crying child. He taught Shigaraki to channel his guilt and trauma into pure hatred for the society that completely ignored him.
And he levels up significantly. There is this insane arc in the sources called My Villain Academia, where the perspective shifts entirely to the League as they fight a rival domestic terrorist group called the Meta Liberation Army.
The Meta Liberation Army is fascinating politically. They believe quirk use should be completely unrestricted by the government. It is a libertarian nightmare scenario where might essentially makes right. Shigaraki fights their leader, and he goes through a quirk awakening. He remembers his trauma, and his power evolves. He can now decay entire cities just by touching the ground. The decay spreads outward like a rapid virus. He defeats their leader, Destro, and instead of killing him, he absorbs their massive army.
So now, the League of Villains is not just a ragtag group of street criminals. They rebrand into the Paranormal Liberation Front. They have thousands of trained soldiers, vast financial resources, and a giant walking natural disaster of a monster named Gigantomachia.
Meanwhile, on the hero side of things, Endeavor has officially become the #1 hero by default since All Might retired. And this is a really compelling narrative thread. Can a man who ruthlessly abused his wife and children to gain power actually serve as a legitimate symbol of hope for a nation?
He is really trying, though, right? He has that brutal fight with the High-End Nomu. He is horribly scarred. He is struggling against this bioengineered monster. He is trying to prove himself to the public, and he is trying to make amends with his family, even though his son Natsuo basically tells him to drop dead and then apologize nothing.
And the narrative does not let him off the hook at all. It firmly states that doing a good deed today does not erase the domestic abuse of yesterday, but he still has to try. It adds a thick layer of complexity to the good guy's side. We do not have a flawless Superman. We have a deeply flawed, guilty man desperately trying to hold the roof up while the house burns.
Which brings us right to the Paranormal Liberation. The heroes get military intel. They find out Dr. Garaki, the mad scientist behind AFO, is surgically upgrading Shigaraki to possess AFO's original quirk and unmatched body durability. The heroes launch a massive two-pronged preemptive raid on the hospital and the villain Mountain Villa.
This is one of the biggest scale battles in the entire series. It is effectively their D-Day, pro-heroes and students versus the Paranormal Liberation Front. But two catastrophic things happen that permanently break society. First, Shigaraki wakes up from his stasis tube early. The surgery is only 75% complete, but he still possesses All for One's original quirk, now alongside his wake and decay. He wakes up, touches the floor, and immediately decays a massive chunk of an entire city in seconds. It is a scene of absolute apocalyptic horror.
And right in the middle of this sheer physical chaos, we get the emotional Dabi's dance. This was a huge fan theory for years in the real world, and when the reveal hit in the story, it hit freight train.
Oh, absolutely. Dabi, the blue flame user in the League, hijacks the national television airwaves. While standing on the battlefield, he reveals his true identity to the world. He is Toya Todoroki, Endeavor's eldest son, who was presumed dead in a fire years ago.
He literally airs all the dirty family laundry to the whole world on live TV.
He completely destroys society's faith in heroes in one fell swoop. He essentially says, your brand new #1 hero is a vicious domestic abuser who created me, pushed me past my physical limit, and then tossed me aside like garbage because I was not the perfect weapon. He also leaks footage of the #2 hero, Hawk, executing a retreating villain named Twice. It breaks the public trust completely. It disrupts the entire parasocial relationship the public has with these regulated heroes. Cannot trust the #1 and #2 heroes. The system is a...
And the physical toll of this war is just as bad as the PR. Shigaraki and the villains have. Bakugo takes a brutal stab wound that was meant for death. Huge moment of character. Sacrificing himself. Midnight, one of Aizawa, their homeroom teacher, actually cuts off his own leg with a knife on the battlefield to stop a quirk destroy spreading through his...
It is a Pyrrhic victory at best for the hero. The villains eventually retreat when Gigantomachia is sedated by the student, but Japan is left in utter ruins. The Tartarus prison is broken open, releasing all the worst criminals. All for One's main body is freed, Society totally collapsed. The stock market crashes, civilians lose faith in the police and start buying illegal support items to violently defend themselves. The golden age of heroes ends overnight.
This directly leads to what is known as the Dark Deku era. And this is where the tone shifts radically from a high school shonen adventure to something that feels almost post-apocalyptic.
Midoriya leaves UA High. He drops out. He realizes that Shigaraki and All for One are specifically hunting him because they desperately want to steal One for All. So to protect his friends and his mother, he goes completely rogue.
And he is unlocking all these new quirks from the previous users of One for All, right? He has got Black Whip, which shoots these dark tendrils. He has Float, Danger Sense, Smokescreen, Fajin. He visually looks like a monster. His costume is torn. He is covered in mud and blood. He is not sleeping at all, just ruthlessly hunting escaped villains in the rain.
He falls into the exact same trap his idol All Might did. The Atlas Complex. He thinks he has to carry the entire weight of the world on his shoulders alone. He actively pushes everyone away because he genuinely thinks that is how he keeps them safe. He stops eating, stops taking care of himself. He becomes a hollowed-out vigilante machine.
And during this dark period, we get this incredibly pregnant encounter with a character named Lady Nagant. She is a former pro-hero who turned into a lethal sniper assassin for the government and then eventually turned villain and was locked in Tartarus. AFO sends her to hunt Deku.
She represents the hidden rot in the old system. She shows that the flawless peace All Might created was actually maintained by secret government assassinations in the shadows. But Midoriya, even in his exhausted, battered state, saves her life during their fight. He proves to her that the spirit of a true hero still exists, not as a regulated government job, but as an unwavering ideal.
But despite saving her, he is physically and mentally breaking. And his classmates, Class 1A, they are simply not having. They track him down in the ruin.
This is arguably one of the most emotional sequences in the entire narrative. They do not fight him to defeat him or hurt him. They fight him to stop him from hurting himself. They combine all their quirks in this beautiful, coordinated effort just to catch up to his speed. They remind him that he is not alone. And Bakugo, this is the absolute climax of his character arc. He finally apologizes.
A genuine verbal apology after years of...
He bows his head in the pouring rain. He calls him Izuku instead of Deku. He says, "I'm sorry for everything." He admits out loud that he bullied Midoriya out of his own weakness and deep-seated insecurity. And the class finally convinces Midoriya to come back to UA. They basically tell him, "You want to save the world. Fine, but let us save you first."
It fundamentally shifts the story from All Might's catchphrase, "I am here," to a new paradigm of, "We are here."
Precisely. It actively rejects the great man theory in favor of communal collective act.
So Deku is back. He is resting. The heroes are regrouping in UA, which has been converted into a massive fortress. But there is a twist. They find out they have a mall. There is a traitor among the students who has been leaking their locations to AFO since the beginning.
Yuga Aoyama, the sparkly, naval laser student who always looks at the camera. It turns out he was actually born quirkless, exactly like Midoriya. His wealthy parents were terrified he would be ostracized by society, so they made a secret deal with All for One to give him a quirk. But the price of that deal was lifelong, fearful servitude. Aoyama has been leaking info out of sheer terror for his parents' lives, not out of malice.
And when the class finds out the truth, they do not condemn him or lock him away.
No. Midoriya immediately realizes Aoyama is a victim of AFO's manipulation too. Instead of punishing him, they decide to use him as a double agent to feed false information and lure All for One into a final massive trap.
But before that final trap springs, we have a major international the arrival of America's #1 hero, Star and Stripe.
This is a wild, high-octane detour in the story. She arrives with a fleet of fighter jets to help, openly defying international UN orders to stay out of Japan's crisis. Her quirk is called New Order, and it is arguably the most broken power in the series. It allows her to set new rules on the nature of reality simply by touching something and calling its name. She engages Shigaraki in midair.
She throws everything at him, including a literal barrage of cruise missiles, but she loses, right?
She dies. Shigaraki manages to touch her and steal her quirk, but in her final moments, she implants a rule into her own power. The rule states that New Order will violently revolt against other quirks. So the moment Shigaraki absorbs it, the quirk starts tearing him apart from the inside out. It destroys many of the quirks he had previously stolen and severely damages his body, buying the Japanese heroes precious time to finalize their plan. It's the ultimate sacrifice.
So the stage is finally set for the climax. The heroes launch Operation Troy. They use the Warp Gate quirks to forcefully separate the villains into different isolated cages and battlefields across the country. Because they know if Shigaraki and All for One fight side by side, the heroes lose.
Divide and conquer. And this strategy gives us our final, deeply personal matchups. Let us talk about the Todoroki family resolution first. Shoto versus Dabi.
Fire versus ice, brother versus brother.
It is incredibly tragic. Dabi is quite literally burning his own body alive with his hatred. His flames are so hot they're destroying his own flesh. He wants to burn down everything his father Endeavor ever built, even if he turns to ash in the process. Shoto, however, has evolved past his anger. He develops a brand new technique called phosphor, a cold fire that circulates inside his body to perfectly balance his temperature. He fights not to violently put Dabi down, but to stop him, to neutralize the immense heat. It is a battle of de-escalation, trying to save his brother from his own suicidal rage.
Then we have the main villain himself, All for One. He is cornered by Endeavor and Hawk, and the ancient villain does something completely desperate. He uses a rewind.
This is based on the quirk of a rescued child named Eric. AFO injects himself, and he starts physically aging backward. He heals all his old wounds and returns to his absolute prime, the terrifying Demon King era of his life. He becomes physically unstoppable, but there is a catch. He is on a biological clock. He will inevitably rewind all the way into a fetus and then into nothingness, like Benjamin Button on Fast Forward. He's a ticking time bomb, and his only goal is to reach Shigaraki and transfer his consciousness before he ceases to exist.
And who steps up to stall this prime, unstoppable villain? This was the moment that honestly made me cheer when I was reading the source summary. Iron Might.
The ultimate, full-circle moment. All Might, who is completely quirkless and frail now, dons a massive high-tech armored suit. It is basically a mechanized suit, mimicking the various quirks of his former Class 1A student. He steps onto the battlefield to fight the most powerful being on Earth, using absolutely no quirk. Just pure technology, millions of dollars, and gut. He knows for a fact he cannot win. He just needs to buy second, because in a war of this scale, seconds are everything. Meanwhile, on another battlefield, we have Toga versus Uraraka. Toga has unleashed a move called Sad Man's Parade. She is using the deceased villain Twice's blood to create thousands of clones of him. It is an endlessly multiplying army that threatens to overwhelm the entire country. Toga is a character entirely driven by a twisted, misunderstood kind of love. Her quirk requires her to drink blood, and she genuinely wants to become the people she loves by consuming them. Society labeled her a creepy monster from childhood. Uraraka, seeing the pain behind the violence, decides to stop fighting the monster and actually talk to the crying teenage girl.
Uraraka goes through a quirk awakening, floating the entire clone army into the sky. But the real victory here is emotion, not tact. She physically reaches out. She tells Toga.
It shatters the cycle of rejection. Toga, who is dying from overusing her quirk and losing too much blood, is so moved by finally being accepted that she decides to give a blood transfusion to Uraraka to save the heroes. She sacrifices herself for love. It perfectly resolves their conflict through profound empathy and understanding, not through punching the villain into submission.
And then we get back to Bakugo. He is fighting Shigaraki on the floating UA fortress. He unlocks a new level of speed with his explosions called Cluster. But it is Shigaraki punches a hole right through his chest. His heart...
He effectively flatlined. It is a shocking, brutal moment. But a pro hero named Edshot, whose quirk allows him to fold his body as thin as surgical thread, makes the ultimate sacrifice. Edshot uses his ninja quirk to fold his entire body into Bakugo's chest cavity and physically stitch together and become Bakugo's heart to restart.
That is incredibly metal and deeply terrifying when you think about the mechanics.
It is visceral, but it allows Bakugo to get back up, cling to life, and provide one last crucial assist. But all of this is backdrop to the main event. Deku versus Shigaraki in the Sky Coffin.
This final fight is almost entirely meta. Shigaraki is no longer just a guy. He is a horrific fusion of his traumatized child self, Tenko, his adult villain persona, and the parasitic consciousness of All for One trying to take over his body. Deku is physically fighting a monster, but mentally, he clearly sees the crying child trapped inside that shell.
This is the ultimate crux of the entire series. All Might's era was all about a utilitarian approach. Smash the evil, lock them up, eliminate the immediate physical threat for the greater good of the masses. Deku's era, however, is fundamentally about saving the villain from themselves. He actively wants to break through the physical and mental shell of hatred to rescue the victim underneath.
To do this, he has to give up his power. He uses Gear Shift, the final locked quirk within One for All. It breaks the literal laws of inertia. He forcefully transfers the quirk, essentially smashing them into Shigaraki's soul to do internal damage. He hits him with a 120% Detroit smash, but he is not just trying to punch the villain into the sun to kill him. He's trying to violently punch his way into the mental.
And we are currently watching the climax unfold, where the entire world is watching this broadcast. You have Lady Nagant, the sniper we mentioned earlier, shooting from miles away from a hospital bed to blow off Shigaraki's hands and prevent decay. You have all the previous dead users of One for All fighting alongside Deku in the metaphysical mental realm. It's a total, unified, collective effort to stop the vicious cycle of abuse that created Shigaraki in the first place. Deku finally drags Shigaraki down to the ground for the final confrontation, realizing that destroying the villain means nothing if you cannot save Tenko Shimura.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, let us bring this all back to the core. What does My Hero Academia actually say about society? It started chapter 1 as a story about a powerless wanting...
But it evolved. It moved from a monologue of, this is the story of how I became the greatest hero, to a chorus of, this is the story of how we became the greatest hero. That shift to the plural is everything.
It is the ultimate rejection of the great man theory in favor of a strong community.
Exactly. The series meticulously deconstructs the idea of the singular pillar of society. All Might was undeniably great, but his godlike existence made society incredibly lazy and fragile. Every day, people stopped looking out for their neighbors because they assumed, oh, All Might will handle it, the professionals will handle it. When he eventually fell, the society immediately crumbled because the foundation was rotten.
The new model, what Deku, Class 1 heir, and the reformed heroes are trying to build out of the ashes, is not a pillar, it is a web.
It is a vast web of mutual support. It is the pro-hero, sure, but it is also the students, and crucial, it is the civilian. It is the old lady on the street extending a hand to a lost, dirty child instead of ignoring it. True peace is not maintained by one incredibly strong guy punching a supervillain into jail. It is maintained by a society where everyday people take responsibility and help the crying child before they ever turn into a Shigaraki.
That is a really powerful thematic, and it essentially asks the listener a very uncomfortable question. If your society completely collapses into anarchy the moment one celebrity retires, was it ever really safe to begin with?
Or was it just complacent? And I think the sources argue that true safety comes from that meddling quality Midoriya showed in Chapter 1, from everyone taking a little bit of responsibility for the person standing right next.
That is a fantastic, provocative play. We went from sludge villains in an alleyway to rewriting the laws of reality, but the core message remains exact. You really do not need a quirk hero, but you do shout it.
Wonderfully said.
Thank you all for listening to this deep dive into the world of My Hero Academia. It is a massive, wild ride of a story, but absolutely one worth taking and analyzing. We will catch you on the next one.
Go beyond. Plus Ultra.